Welcome to Functional Philosophy, the show in which I, Charles II, explain and apply Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism. If you'd like to ask me a question on objectivism or its application, just go to charles2.com/contact. And my last name is spelled T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. Would an objectivist support a law that is a movement in the right direction from the current situation? Or would it be moral to only support a law that is consistent with an objective framework? For the second option, would the entire system need to be overhauled, all at exactly the same time? While it's shocking to me that you felt the need to preemptively ask a follow-up, as if it were even conceivable that I would agree with the second formulation. Do you really think that I'm going to say, yes, the only moral thing to do is for a politician to refuse to vote for anything or sponsor any kind of legislation until we get a giant omnibus bill that restructures the entire government, changes all laws simultaneously? I mean, that is just ludicrous. Anyway, aside from that, first you say, would it be moral to only support a law? Clearly what you actually mean is, would it only be moral to support a law? The way you framed it, you're literally asking, would it be moral if you only supported laws that were good, rather than, is it only moral to support laws that are good? Those are two different things. And also you mention objective framework. Would it be moral to only support a law that is consistent with an objective framework? What does that mean? People just throw the word objective, randomly into the questions they send me. Presumably on the grounds that, well, this is objectivism, I guess I should have objective in there somewhere. Objective, in the legal sense, means a law that is rationally interpretable. It's not objective in the full sense of being justifiable based on the facts of reality, but at least it doesn't depend on whim in order to interpret. So there are all kinds of bad laws that are objective in that sense. You could have the fine for jaywalking be $1 million, or the death penalty. That's objective in the sense that there's no ambiguity there. It's clear, it's objective what the law means, but that would still be a very bad law. Ayn Rand specifically points out what dictatorship does is not just have draconian punishments, but to make the use of force unpredictable. So if your question is, which it clearly is it moral only to support laws that are ideal? Well, the fact that they're objective is just a necessary but not sufficient condition for them being ideal. So let's concretize this. What you're asking is something like, would it be okay for a politician to vote for a reduction in taxes, or is that wrong because it's a compromise and he should refuse to vote for anything except the abolishment of taxation, the abolition of taxation? And then you could even say, well, he would be wrong even to vote for legislation that does that, because that's still a kind of compromise. It accepts that the legislature should be able to decide that, so maybe he should hold out and only vote for a constitutional amendment that abolishes taxation. And the answer is no. Obviously, it's okay for a politician to vote for things that move us in the right direction rather than hold out for what would exist in an ideal society. Now, your concern here is, but isn't this compromise, and isn't compromise wrong? Well, as Ayn Rand points out, compromise is wrong when it is a compromise of principle, not a compromise within an accepted principle. She uses the example of a thief versus haggling over price. If you go up to a merchant and you haggle over the price of some item, you come to a compromise, a price you're willing to pay, he's willing to accept. That's a compromise, but it's a compromise within the principle that you both accept, which is that you should pay something for this product. And Ayn Rand contrasts this with a thief who comes by and steals from you, and then you compromise by saying, well, what if you only take half of what you stole? And that'll be okay. That is a compromise of principle. That is what is wrong. Now, don't be superficial and confused here. I'm not saying then, if somebody holds you up at gunpoint, you should say, no, you can't have my wallet. You're under duress. That's not the point. The point is morally accepting that, morally approving of the idea that, yes, that's the kind of compromise that is legitimate. So your question is, well, isn't this compromise? A politician who votes for, let's cut taxes from 30% to 15%, he's still accepting that taxes are okay. Just like if you said, well, don't steal everything I own, just take half of it. You're still saying that theft is okay. Isn't that the same thing? No, it is not the same thing. You are, whether you know it or not, coming at this from an anarchist, libertarian perspective. The broader principle here is the principle of law and order, the necessity of government. The broader principle that you are agreeing with the pro-taxation people on is that we have a system of law and order, we pass laws in a certain way, and the government functions in this predictable, objective, definite way. And within that, you can disagree about the laws. So it's the equivalent of haggling over price. You're both working within the principle of accepting the way that a constitutional republic functions. Now, you can reach a context in which this is no longer legitimate. If enough laws are passed that the system starts to become basically oppressive, its basic characters that it violates rather than protects rights, then you can say that, well, it's not worth respecting the sanctity of the government anymore because it's not being used in our favor, in favor of human freedom and flourishing. Ayn Rand said there is one thing worse than war, and that is slavery. So you can reach a point at which war, rebellion, insurrection is preferable to slavery, but there is a very wide range of situations in which a compromised, so-called, or imperfect system or application of freedom is preferable to war and rebellion against your basically free society. So no, it would not be okay to say, well, my society's basically free, but we have a 3% taxation, so overthrow the whole thing. That is completely wrong. People like James Madison, Abraham Lincoln recognize this. It is the protection of the overall system that is most important, so long as that system is doing more to defend your freedom than to violate it. And if you're a libertarian and you don't understand the necessity of law and order for freedom, well, then you just think, well, it's always harming our freedom. Ideally, we should get rid of the government. But no, having a single monopoly of force that implements laws, as long as those laws aren't totalitarian, even if many of them are bad, having a predictable system of retaliatory force, the value of that is difficult to overstate. It is crucial, indispensable for freedom. So, recognition of that fact is what constitutes the broader principle within which you are compromising. So, if you're on the street arguing with somebody, if I were talking to some leftist, yes, it would be a compromise for me to say, well, yes, we should have some taxation. Because I'm talking in theory, I'm talking in terms of where we ultimately want to go. But when you're in the government, the principle is we have a system of laws. Let's respect that. Let's respect the process by which we pass laws. And then within that, we can move things in a better direction. And we don't have to wait until we get some giant bill that changes everything at once, or until we get a law that is perfect. Given our current political party choices in the US, Republican, Democrat, and Libertarian, are the Libertarians the best choice for an individual's rational self-interest? I get that most of the Libertarians are probably altruist, just like Republicans and Democrats, but at least they do not think it is the job of the government to enforce altruism. No, the Libertarian Party is not your best option politically. They are the worst of the worst. They are theoretical anarchists, but on top of that, they believe in a theory-practice dichotomy. Because their stupid ideas don't work in practice, they believe in anarchy in theory, and then in practice endorse statism. Gary Johnson wanted to force that bakery to bake the cake for the gay couple. So this is what happens when you get unphilosophical or philosophically fundamentally wrong or anti-philosophical groups. They have all of this theory, but not only are they wrong in theory, in practice, they just think, oh, well, of course, that's our libertarian theory. Obviously, it has nothing to do with reality. Force these people to bake the cake. So anarchism in theory and statism in practice, which shouldn't be that surprising because anarchism is a form of statism. So should you vote libertarian? No. They are also just disgustingly nihilistic and weird whim worshippers, specifically the Libertarian Party of the United States. Ayn Rand called them the hippies of the right, and I can't think of a more accurate way of describing them. Now, I will never vote again, but if we had some kind of totalitarian system like Australia has, where you're fined or otherwise punished for not voting, which is a law I would not put it past libertarians to support, then I would walk up to the booth, look for the L, and then press any other button at random. How can a solution be derived for air pollution? What if it were not a single company, but multiple companies releasing different toxic compounds into the air? What would be an objective way to find out the guilty party without relying on extraneous government agencies, such as the EPA in the USA, to monitor toxic compounds and where they are produced? Well, in terms of discovering where the air pollution originated, I have no idea. I'm not a scientist of the type who knows how to figure things like that out. I'm not a scientist of any type. You'd walk outside of your house, you'd see that you're choking, and you'd see the smog. And then, presumably, you could just infer, oh, it must be that factory that's nearby, the one that produces smog like this, or air pollution like this. And in that kind of case, assuming the right context, you were there first, etc., then you could sue them. It's no different from dumping solid waste on your lawn. Or if they came to you first, you could set up some kind of arrangement, just like is set up with solid waste, where you could charge them for the smog they're creating. And if it were really profitable for them to engage in whatever activity is producing air pollution as a byproduct, then they should be able to afford to pay you. That's how property rights ensure human progress, ensure production. But now you say, what if it were not a single company, but multiple companies? So we have so many companies releasing toxic compounds that we can't track down which one caused the air pollution that is affecting you specifically. It's like cars. Cars drive around, you can't pinpoint which person on which day, which car created the air pollution that's causing you to choke right now, because they're just cars everywhere. Well, in that case, smog is a metaphysical necessity of human life, and you just have to deal with it. It's like breathing. If your neighbor said, I don't like how when you breathe, you push CO2 onto my yard, so stop breathing. You would say that's ridiculous. Breathing is inherent in human life. You can't implement property rights or liberty in a way that contradicts the basic requirements of human life, because protection of human life is the basis of all rights. So you can't say, well, I don't want this stuff to be pushed onto my yard as a result of your breathing. Too bad. Breathing, you just have to accept that's part of human life. And if we were at a stage of industrial civilization where production required this level of air pollution, it was so common that you couldn't track down where it came from, then it's a metaphysical necessity like breathing, and nobody should be punished for it. And if you don't like it, move to some place with pristine air where you will die before you're 30 years old. Now, the way you phrased this question is based on a disastrously wrong way of thinking about the issue and, well, the issue of issues. You ask, how can a solution be derived for air pollution? So air pollution is a problem and we have to solve it. Nothing is a problem until it can be solved. If it can't be solved, it's just a fact. But treating something as if it is a problem outside of context leads to the kind of attitude that legislators and governments actually take toward air pollution today, which is an extremely irrational one. It's like if you got a scrape on your leg, you fell down and you scraped your knee, and you said, wow, that hurts. This is a problem, I need to solve it. Well, it's only a problem if you have a Band-Aid or some kind of ointment or at least water where you can wash the wound. But you don't say, this is intrinsically a problem. Do I have a Band-Aid? No? Let's move on to the next thing. Do I have water to at least wash it? No? Okay, well then I'll cut off my leg. So then I don't feel the pain of the scrape anymore. Well, that's obviously ridiculous, because the solution is worse than the actual so-called problem. That's because it isn't a problem in that context. If the only solution involves actually making things worse, then it's not a solution. So you have to think of this in context. And the way the government has thought about air pollution is exactly the same way I just described that attitude towards scraping your knee. They do treat air pollution, particulate matter in the air, as an intrinsic problem outside of all context. So we want to reduce the amount of particulate matter in the air. And they will go to the length of cutting off your leg, the equivalent of that, in order to get it down, because they just think of it as a problem. But it's not a problem if getting rid of it means shutting down industrial civilization. Then it's just a fact, a metaphysically necessary fact of human life. So you cannot go around thinking about things as problems intrinsically. You have to contextualize things. You have to think in context. So until and unless air pollution can be solved without harming human life, it isn't a problem. In the same way that the need to breathe isn't a problem. You don't think, oh man, I can't believe I have to breathe. No, that's just required for human life. It's something you have to do. It's a fact. Now, in a way, you might think of it as a problem. The tricky thing here is that human beings, because we're so ingenious, we can conceive of almost everything as a problem, because we're always improving things and fixing things. But the point is, in principle, you don't regard something like 2 + 2 = 4 as a problem to solve. That is just an unalterable fact. And so long as in your context something is unalterable, then it's not a problem to be solved. So if air pollution were so common that you couldn't even track down its source, it's not a problem. It's just a metaphysical fact. If you'd like to keep up with everything I do, just go to charles2.com. If you'd like to enable me to do more, just go to patreon.com/charles2 and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.